Good afternoon. This is a QA session, just so you know what you're attending, a QA session related to rostering, which is a follow-up from Friday's session that we held on April 2nd regarding the rostering process within NWEA. It's going to be a QA session, so more of a technical assistance session rather than a presentation. We are going to do another quick demonstration regarding how rostering looks, and then we'll dive into any questions that you have and any technical assistance needs that you have. We have Andy Wallace here as our content person. We have Varun Mote from the department, and we also have Alex directly from NWEA. So I'll hand it over to them.
Great, thanks, Jeanette. Yeah, let me go ahead. I'm going to start with going through a demo, just for people who didn't get a chance to see it before, or people who are going through that rostering process now, for you just to have another chance to see what it looks like and see what might come up. I think it was mentioned a moment ago, but there was a great document that Andy helped put together that's now been posted on the main DOE page, just giving some step-by-step instructions on how to get that student export out of NEO, and also some instructions on how to use PowerSchool or Infinite Campus running like SQL queries and ways to pull student and staff information out of your SIS into the NWEA roster file format. So definitely take a look there if you haven't yet, because that document's really going to go hand in hand with what we're talking about today. So let me share my screen just a moment here. All right, so you guys should all be seeing our MARC site. So this is going to be the main homepage for when you log into MAP. And then once you're here, depending on your role, if you're rostering, you should have that data administrator role, and you would see this import profiles rostering option along the left. So that's where you're going to start from. What you should do before you really get to this point is follow those steps in that document I mentioned to get that export from NEO. You're going to want to choose that Excel file option rather than the CSV, because the Excel file will give you the data in our roster template format. Let me actually show a copy of that template really quick too, so everyone's familiar with the columns and the fields that are in there. So just a moment. Okay. There we go. All right, so you guys should be seeing this Excel file here. So if you have been using MAP or NWEA before, then you may have an older copy of the template. There have been some changes and some new columns to keep in mind. So the main differences are going to be the school state code right here in column A. As you keep going over, and by the way, all of the blue highlighted ones are required, so you want to make sure those are all filled in. You'll see other new ones, like we have student state ID is another important one in column O right here. So you want to put in that main student state ID. And then those are really the two main ones, is the school state code and student state ID. There is also instructor state ID, but that's not required. So you don't have to put that in. And then there are two on the end that you might see, student username and student email. Those actually aren't really used, so you can leave those blank. So this will be the template that you're using. If you go back on the website, so back here, and actually back on the home page, you can always click right here to download the roster file template, and that'll provide you the template with all of the proper columns and all the right headings. And when you do that export from NEO, it will give you a file with the proper columns. I do want to call out that the first, I think, 12 or so rows is some kind of extra header information, so you'll want to delete those out so that the actual headers of the data is the first row in that file from NEO. And then from there, you will want to save that as a .csv, delimited file type. And again, these are all in that document, all these steps. But that'll need to be a CSV for you to import it into the system. So I'm going to go through that now. So you'll go to import profiles rostering. You'll start a new import. And we're all working on the spring term. So we'll want to just leave it on standard and then on spring 2021. So there's kind of two ways to go about it. The way we're suggesting that should make things easier for everyone is when you do get that file export from NEO, you'll notice it only has student information and all of the teacher columns are not present, since that information isn't easily available in NEO. So you can import that file as it is after you've removed those header rows and do a student only import. I do want everyone to realize, though, that you'll still need to add that teacher and class information with your own file. So you could either edit that file to add that information into the file manually, Or what may be easier is import that file as a student-only import, then use those extra steps to pull your teacher, class, and student information out of PowerSchool and Infinite Campus, and then just import that one as well. So in this case, for student only, you'll click that here, and we'll go to add the file here. There we go. And let's see, I've got one here that we can practice with. All right, and then you'll click next. And then it'll show you a preview of the file. As you see here, this is missing all the teacher columns. So this is going to match what you're getting out of NEO, and confirm. And then it'll validate here. So it'll just take a minute or two as it goes through. It's a good chance to point out that we've got a great help section right here that you can click on if you do get stuck. There are some instructional videos and how-tos. So if you're either getting errors in your file or errors coming up through the website saying there's something wrong with the data, this will walk you through how to correct those. So that's always available to you. There we go. All right, and in this case, as you see, there are some errors. I did plug some errors into the file so we get a chance to look through them. So here we've got around 3 errors. So this will give you a summary. There's 102 students in the file. Nothing has been posted yet since we're still working on it. So we'll go to reconcile. In this case, these are group errors. So this is something you may run into if the way your school is labeled in NEO is a little different than what you have here in MAP already. You can always confirm the way your schools are named under modified district. But we can go here to school errors. And in this case, in the file, it was called Green Valley. We actually have different schools in this environment. So I think the one we're using here is Experience School. So in this case, you'll select option 2. You'll type in the name of the correct school that corresponds to what was on the file, and then save and next. And then you'll see the next school error. If you get those, do the same thing here. In this case, we're going to do Experience School 2. Continue. All right, so you'll see that there's 0 errors remaining for this category, and they're reconciled, and there were also ethnic group errors, so we'll click that next. And it's the same type of situation, so it's pretty picky on the way the names are written out. It needs to match exactly. Again, you can confirm under modified district how the ethnic group names are already in the system, but you'll also just have the chance to reconcile them here. So either way will work. In this case, in the file, we have an ethnic group just called Black, but in our system, it's called Black or African American. So you'll just want to select the one that corresponds to what was in the file here. And then save and next. Sometimes you will come up with student errors as well. So what that means essentially is that there's data that's already in the map site that doesn't quite match what's coming through on the file. So instances where this may come up is if students have maybe a different preferred name or gender or other demographics that are different, possibly in the NEO system and in your local SIS. So in that case, let me go to a screenshot of it really quick, because this should be a good way to show. So yeah, these are the group errors we mentioned. Here's where you'd see a student error. And I know it's kind of small. Let's see if that helps a little bit. So if you did see any student errors and clicked on that, then you'd have these options here. So essentially, the data that's on your file is always going to be considered the most recent and correct data, but it'll still give you the option of which to use. So you'll see either 1, do not reconcile. That just skips the error. You'll still have to come back and fix it. So you don't want to choose that one. If it is an issue with the username or the email not matching, you can just correct that and put it in here. More than likely, though, it's going to be whether or not you choose option 3. So you'll see like this line here, there would actually be the same type of line right above this screenshot on the website showing you what's coming through in the file. And then you'll want to compare that with the line here. This on number 3 is what's in the system currently. So if what's coming through in the file matches the proper name, all the proper demographics for that student, then you would choose option 3. That would overwrite what it's showing in line 3 with the data coming through in the file. If the reverse is true and what you're seeing here on 3 is correct and what's coming through in the file is incorrect, then in that case, it'd be best to choose to do not import at this time. Otherwise, it would overwrite it and change those demographics to what's in the file. There's an option to export your errors. Now this one's zoomed in. There we go. You can export your errors to CSV if you have student errors. That way, it'll easily just give you a file of which students came up as a conflict. So you can go back into that NEO file, that export, correct those demographics to how they should be, and then just re-import and start that process again.
Hey, Alex, can I interrupt for a second and
Sure.
talk about something that I've heard from a few people in the field, and they are rightfully cautious about this. So
Okay.
if you were a school district that had used NWEA in the past, often I see this with power school districts. Power school districts will typically use a student ID that is different from the main state ID, especially long-standing power school districts. If they were to put that existing ID in the previous ID field, would that overwrite things? Would they have, like, you know, when they did an import, would they have to verify every single kid, or does that just sort of make a connection between an existing student and the new 9-digit state ID that we would encourage them to use so that data can move around better?
Sure. That's a good thing to mention. So I do want to point out there are two different student ID fields. There's the student state ID, which is going to be column O. So we recommend everyone put in their student main state ID in that field. And then there is just the regular student ID field. So the regular field, you can use a local ID if you have those longstanding IDs you've been using that you track students by, or you have district IDs, you can use them there. So as long as the student state ID field has the main issued student state ID, that's where you need to have it. As far as that previous student ID column, what it does, like Andy's saying, is if you know students are using an old ID numbering system, you can put the old ID in that previous ID column. And then whatever's in the regular student ID column, it'll automatically overwrite it with that new ID. So in our case, for the state ID, you can bypass that and just use the state ID column O. But if you did want to, through the roster without having to manually change them, update the regular student ID column in bulk, you can use that previous ID, put the old ID there, and then whatever is in the current ID column, it'll replace it automatically, and you won't have to reconcile them all through this page.
Great. I would also just say, I completely get it. Whenever I do an update or upload of students, everyone's biggest fear is duplicating kids. And I do think the checks that are built into NWEA make it very difficult to accidentally duplicate a student.
Yeah, that's another good point too. So it'll flag these reconcilable errors, and it's going to check based on things like ID, name, date of birth. If a student has the same birthday, but the name's a little different, or there's other things that are matching that aren't quite the same but are very close, then it'll flag it as a potential error to reconcile. And you might see some students that just have really similar information are flagged even though they're not actually duplicates. So that's, again, just our system trying to be extra cautious so you don't have those duplicates. And in those cases, you can choose to just ignore the error and continue. So in a case like that where it's a false error, you can choose to create a new profile because this student is not the one it's showing, it's a new student to the system, and you can choose that option. All right, so once you've gone through and reconciled your errors, then you would want to return to the import summary. And then the very final click you'll need to make to actually post the roster is this post valid records button. So until you click this, it hasn't actually gone through yet. But once you click this, it does just take a moment to post. And then you'll see that it shows that it's been successful. And then you can also always look in your import profile history here, and you can see when one has posted. So in this case, we do a lot of testing in here. Most of them got canceled, but you can see on this date, it was successfully posted. There we go. I do want to mention the user import too briefly. So if I go back to that template here, let me switch.
Hey, Alex?
Yeah.
Can we get you just to slow down a little bit? You seem to be like on overdrive, and I just want to make sure that everybody's understanding what you're trying to communicate.
All right. Thanks, Regina. I appreciate that. I do kind of launch right into things, so hopefully I'm not going too fast. Yeah, let me know. Are there any questions about anything I covered now, anything I need to reiterate or that people might have missed with the errors or any of the steps so far? Okay, I think we're good. Please let me know if there are. I'll move forward a little slower, so thanks. All right, I'm going to switch back to the Excel template here. All right, so looking back at this template, the same one you can get on the home page, here's the regular roster. There is another tab here along the bottom that's additional users. So you can always create users through the website by just going to manage users and adding them manually. But if you have a large number of staff you want to add in, you can use this file. I do want to point out that on the regular roster, assuming it has all the teacher information filled out, the one you pull out of your own district SIS, it will create those teacher profiles when that's imported. So you don't have to add teachers through this process, but it is good to know that it doesn't automatically add the proctor role to teachers that get created through the file. So any teachers that are going to be proctoring, and we know the majority of our partners just have the teachers proctor their own students, you'll want to add that proctor role. So you can do that with this file. So once again, there are columns that are optional. The main ones that are going to be required would be the user's information. So first name, last name, the username that they'll be logging in with, and the email. Technically, the email is optional, but we always recommend it. That way, if people need to reset their password, there's an email for that to get sent to. And for the username, we just recommend using the email address because it has to be unique throughout all of NWEA. If you do like John Smith 1, somebody's probably already taken it somewhere else. So we recommend the email there. And then when we're getting to these columns, J and on, these are the actual roles. So we have roles like school proctor, assessment coordinator, district proctor, data administrator. So they're all detailed on our website, just kind of at a high level. Data administrator is going to be the person doing these types of imports. So you probably already have that role if you're at this point, but if there's anyone else who would need to do that, you can assign it here. Then we've got school proctor and district proctor. So they're able to actually give the assessment and proctor the test. You can choose district proctor if you expect that user to be testing students from throughout the district, or they just need that visibility to all the sessions. Or you can choose school proctor if you know they're only going to be testing at a particular school and they don't need to see all of the extra students or extra sessions. And then the role of the other ones would really be school assessment coordinator. So that gives some extra access, like to view reports and view student data for that school. And then administrator is similar, where it would allow you to view reports for the school that you've chosen. So essentially you would just put a Y on that row for that user if you want them to have this role, or just leave it blank if you don't want to add it, don't want to make any changes to that role. And then honestly, that import process is pretty simple. It's going to be the same steps. You just choose additional users and you add that user file here and go through it.
Okay, we have had a question in the chat. And it's a question about doing the rosters manually. Is that a problem? And is there a place where you can see all the students and all the teachers?
Gotcha. Yeah, there's no problem doing it manually as long as you make sure everything's in there, which I think is the second half of your question. So there is an option to get an export of students that are in the system, so you can just see who's been rostered. So the best way to do that is we'll go back home first. You can go to view reports and then operational reports. This is a great place to look and view things about the system. So not like score reports, but who's rostered, what users exist, things like that. So here, operational reports along the top, there is this students by district. So this one will actually export all of the students who have been rostered to your district. So you can just look through and see who's in the system.
Alex, I think we're just showing the spreadsheet still.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, let
You're
me
welcome.
switch that back over. There we go. All right, let me just navigate there one more time again. So yeah, to get to operational reports, you just go to view reports along the left and then operational reports. And then here you'll see all those options to pull reports on what's in the system. So which users, you can view which students haven't tested yet. You can see instructors who don't have classes. The students by district one is going to give you that export of all the students who have been rostered. So you can look in and see. And then there are also ones for users. So you can see a list of all of your users and the roles that are assigned to them. So you can double check those. And then you can also see if there are profiles that have like duplicated IDs, if the same person was assigned the same ID. So that can help you with some data cleanup. So we'll do this students by district one. and create. All right, and then you'll be here in the reports queue, and that's where you can go in and download it. And this is all dummy data, so it's fine for me to share. I'm gonna share that window real quick so you have a chance to see what it looks like. There we go. All right, and then this particular report, since it's focused on student information, it will still provide it in our roster template format, but it's just gonna have student info listed. So you'll see here which students, the names, the IDs, the demographics, and all of that. So then that could be something you compare to that NEO file. If you want to like do a search by the student state ID, that's usually the best unique identifier to make sure kids that are expected to test from NEO are actually here in this file and you know they're in the system. All right, were there any other questions or anything else that we would want a chance to see demoed?
How about a list of teachers that are in the system?
Yeah, let me do that one. So we'll go back to operational reports here and then user roles. And there may be a lot of users in this sandbox here, so we'll see how lengthy this file ends up being. But you can do user role report, and once it loads here, there we go. So you can choose, of course, your term, and you can choose by role who you want to see. So if you just want to see all the teachers, you can do that. If you want to confirm that your teachers are also proctors, then you could do that and see if there's maybe some teachers you need to add that role to if they'll be giving the test. And then you can choose which school if you're just wanting to narrow that search. So, and you can also choose if the profile is active or inactive. The majority of the time, they're all going to be active, but you can go in and inactivate old users that aren't using the system anymore.
So it's worth knowing that because lots of us have used this before for many years, that if a teacher leaves a district, you don't actually delete them. You can inactivate them. And as an instructor, they'll persist because later on, you might need to know who was associated with that group of kids. And so I tend to, when I'm trying to do cleanup, if I'm trying to do cleanup, I look more at school proctor. Allows me to narrow the list because you might have a lot of instructors in there that are not proctoring. So if you're trying to figure out who your proctor list is, you can use those drop-down boxes under roles just to get that focus group. Otherwise, you're going to see old, dearly departed colleagues that have moved on either in life or to another school district. So you can't get rid of them, but you can deactivate them as active proctors and users of the system.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Andy. So because even if they've left, they're still going to have students rostered to their classes for those prior terms and prior years. And if you were to try to delete them, then that would remove that association. So just inactivating them leaves their profile in the system. So you can still view those old reports if you need to, but it prevents them from being able to log in or have any access any longer. All right, and sometimes these reports can take a while. Oh, there we go. It actually came up, so that's great. Let me pull this up, and there it is. Okay, so in this case, I selected every school, so it may end up being kind of long. But here, you'll be able to see the names of the users and the role that they have. And you can also see if they're active or inactive and when they were created. So this could be a good way to reference who's in the system and if you need to add any other roles to them.
Alex, one more thing. If we had a new kid that came at the last second and you manually put them in, right? Which I know some people will do after they do their big upload. I wanted to call out because I got a couple of questions this week that one of the fields that is a required field for the upload, the template, is the school code or the district code rather. And that's not a field that you would select. The system just knows that by virtue of bringing them in, that they're assigned to that district. So don't feel like you're missing a piece of information.
Yep, you're exactly right. Basically, since every map site is assigned to your district, if you're creating a student, then it's already going to be assigned to your district. You can still go in and choose which school, but that district piece is already filled out. All right, and then should I go through that create a student process one more time?
I think it's worth it. I mean,
okay.
I think people will want to know because, my experience in the field has been, a kid comes in at the last second, someone asked me to put them in. So I had to weigh the calculus of, am I going to re-upload everything or am I going to put them in individually? So I do think it's important for people to understand, like, you know, as a tech director or a DAC, sometimes you get that 7:30 text message to, hey, can we add that kid? We're testing in 45 minutes. So you might want to see how the process works.
Yeah, and
Gotcha.
I am seeing some nodding heads, so let's go with that.
Okay, thanks, Regina. Yeah, so in that case, just like Andy's saying, you probably don't want to have to re-import the whole file if there's a student showing up last minute. So you can always just go to Manage Students and then create the student profile here. So you'll see that there are required fields. So the one with the star is required just to even create the profile, and the one with the red R is required for reporting. So ideally, you want to add all of this information in, but if it is that situation where you don't have a lot of time and you just need to get them in and give them the assessment, then you technically can leave out the R's, but you will need to come back and add them in later. So if you maybe don't have that in front of you, you can put that off for a little bit. So in this case, let me just try to create a sample student here. I'll just put my own info in. That ID's probably been used. All right, let's jump through several years back. Okay, let's see if I can continue with that. There we go. All right, so then you'll want to make sure it's the right term. So again, spring 2021, you'll put in the student's grade level. And you will want to put an ethnic group in that matches them from that list from before. All right, and then just keep in mind, only the ones with the star and the R are required. This extra stuff is actually not really going to be used here, so you can just leave those fields blank as they are. And then here's where you'll want to add the school and a class. So I think we've got our experience. Keep forgetting it starts with the X. That should be enough. There we go. Experience school 1, add. All right, and then you do want to add an instructor and a class too. So if we choose this, let me see. Actually, I think they're actually just called instructor. There we go. So you'll choose the school, and then you'll want to start typing in the teacher's last name, and it'll give you a drop down of all teachers that match. So you can select which teacher it is, and then you'll be able to go in and choose which class. So in this case, let's say the student's part of this teacher's class. You'll click Add Class, and it'll move over to the column on the right here that it's going to be assigned, and you'll click on Add Classes. All right, you'll be back on this screen with all of the new selections you've made added in. There is an option to assign students to special programs. It's optional, so if you want to track by program, you can do that. Otherwise, you click Add Term, and then you'll see here that the term you've added is showing here on the student's main profile screen. Then just continue. And then something to always keep in mind anytime you're manually creating a student or a user is it doesn't save until you get to this final screen and click on Submit. So once this is all in there, you just click Submit, and you'll get the message that the profile has been created successfully, and they're actually available that day to be added to a test session. So they would be in that instructor's class. You can add them to your session, and you could test them then if you needed to.
Yeah, so I'd like to, so what Alex just showed you, to take the opportunity to, again, urge you or encourage you. I mean, people will do what they choose, but encourage you to upload math classes and ELA classes whenever possible, right? And then, because what you would do is that would automatically put the kid into that testing session if that ELA or that math teacher is the one who's proctoring the session. So it really does save you a step. And as the tech person who's doing this, or the DAC, you may not have that insight into like what the individual school is doing. So if you're doing that process, you at least know that I need to, when I have a new kid coming into the middle school, Alex showed you adding a kid to one teacher in one class, but you could add 2 teachers. You could add the math class and the ELA class, and the kid would be ready to test that day. That's usually the experience that I've had. I try to get people, it's usually the principal or secretary, try to get them in the habit of telling me who the teacher is. But every morning I fire up my student information system, because I know I'm going to need to find their class. I'm going to need to find their teacher. I'm going to need to know their gender and their birth and their ID. And you can generally get all of that off the your information, student information system. And again, I would highlight too, the first few times I did it, or first times I added a user or reset a password, you got to keep your eye out for that submit button, because it's not done until you hit the submit button. So really look at that submit button.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, and something else to keep in mind is since the student state ID is used as that unique identifier, if you are adding students on the fly, we definitely recommend adding that in if you can. That way in the future, when you are importing a roster, that it'll identify that that student already exists. Maybe some of the details don't quite match because you didn't have them at the time, but if you at least get that student state ID in, then that'll make sure it aligns to future imports.
Okay, we have
Alex,
a question about NEO. If we could interrupt, we have a question about how NEO organizes student cohorts.
So I think, Cindy, no, there's no correlation between NEO and anything in your student information system when it comes to student schedules. So yeah, you would add that. Again, I'd reiterate the process. Step one, you get your kids. I personally would do a full student upload, as Alex demonstrated. Step two is you either create or you use an ad hoc filter or you use a SQL tool to create rosters, testing rosters, and then you would upload those. I don't know if we're going to show the upload of what's called a combined file. Is that the term we use, combined file?
You just mean the regular roster. That would just be the standard roster. Because we did a student only import earlier, and it would just be a regular roster import when the teacher and class information is in there. Standard ad update. Yeah.
Alex, I have a question.
Sure.
So what happens if the student has tested a session in another districts and he comes to this to district B, and how to upload that student? Like, should he test the test session again, or will that test session carry forward?
Sure. So yeah, we wouldn't recommend having to test the student again if they did already complete the test for the term. And that data will be coming back to the DOE in our end of term data file. And you'll be able to identify that student by the state ID, even if the place they tested isn't where they currently reside if they've moved. What we do recommend everyone does is there is a form available on our site where if a student moved from district to district, you can submit this form to have their data transferred into your district's MARC site. That way you can see their test records and have that information. So I can show where that is too.
So that like during testing, if the student moves, you have to submit that form, right?
That's right.
And is there a bulk thing which could be submitted? Like if I have to submit 10 students at a time, like 10 students moved new to my district, this is what I wanted to do. Can we do 10 at a time or one individual?
Yeah, there is. It's basically going to be a spreadsheet where you put in the student information and import it. So you can do multiple. You don't have to do them all one at a time. Let me grab that.
I would say, you know, this is a process that we want people to do, but please understand there's nothing stopping you from accidentally testing a student the second time. And so DAC's, I think, I don't know if it's come out yet, but if I believe like a retesting policy has been articulated. And so, you know, please abide by the retesting policy. We all as colleagues have lists. I believe the DOE maintains a list for us where you can reach out to a data person at a school or the DAC to determine how far along the students have progressed in their NWEA testing. That happens, you know, when you're testing in the middle of the window. It feels like sometimes you get 2-3 kids the last week, and I wouldn't necessarily take their word for it. Hey, did you take that math test? Oh, sure I did. You know, I do think, again, the good news is we're not a large state and we are friendly with one another and we're all responsive to one another. So just kind of keep your colleagues in mind and that empathy of, you know, when someone asks, hey, did Johnny test at your school? Just, you know, shoot an email. It's probably the best way. It's important to note there are no technological safeguards that will stop this from happening.
I have a question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So kind of Reader's Digest version. So essentially, if like I've been doing the NWEA data in Portland for like 4 or 5 years now. So essentially the process is the same, right? As far as the front end of it, we upload from our district and then the results get loaded to NEO, basically. So there's not really any change. So Yeah.
No.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't, oversimplifying it or undersimplifying it or whatever. So yeah.
It is delightfully similar for those of us who have been doing it, Matthew. And
Okay.
so in the end, after the testing window, the Department of Ed, and this is though why it's critical that in your rosters, that column O, if you're not currently using a 9-digit state ID, many of us with Infinite Campus or even Power School already use that. But it's really important that that element is there, as well as the sending the district code, because the state data team at the end of the window will be going into each of our instances of NWEA and extracting, not a lot of information, right? So we signed a data agreement as a school district, and they'll be pulling out the kids based on who they believe you should have tested, and they'll be pulling those 2 test scores, and then they will then load that after they, do a bit of work with it, I'm sure, into the MARS system, the official state data system. But all of our
Okay.
stuff as a local district is very much the same. And it just sits out there and we get our results as soon as we normally would, very quickly often. So not a huge change, which is really refreshing and a plus.
Okay, that's good to know though about the O column, because I don't think normally I use that because it's just local reporting. So I'll go back in and, I have my spreadsheet that I've uploaded. I'll just add those student numbers to that. So that's good to know. So yeah, okay, on the right track. Thank you.
Great. Yeah. So just like you were saying, so it's really going to be the same process, just making sure you have that O column. And if you're already getting exports from your SAS to populate that template, we just recommend you look at that NEO export, at least as reference, so you know all the students there are also in your regular file.
Okay, our next question is pertaining to special programs. Should we be uploading a special programs file? And Lynn, if you need clarification, please chime in.
I think so. What I would use, and what a number of schools use a special programs file for, is for data subsets within the NWEA results area. So for example, if I were looking for, I can make a program of all the young ladies who went to our Girls Who Code camp, because I want to see how they did. Did they see any gains in math? You can make any customized program that you want. Or some people like to do it just for like students who are receiving instructional support services. You can do that locally, Lynn, or you don't have to do it at all. If it's a practice that you currently do, just keep doing it as you have done. It will not, the extra attributes such as a student's race, ethnicity, gender, or other identifications that the Department of Ed has on that student in Synergy will be appended independently of this process. So don't feel like you have to replicate what you do in your Synergy exports.
Great. Thanks, Andy.
Okay.
Alex, you're going to show how to move the student.
Yeah, I can show you the form here. So we've got the page here on our connection site. So you can search for district transfer, and I can provide a link to that too. I can put it in the chat, but we can also put it somewhere that's easier to access so people know where to find it. But yeah, basically you can read, when to use this, how to use this, what information you'll need to put in the template. Honestly, when I go through the process here, it does kind of look by IP to make sure you're in the right state, and it'll populate information relevant to you. So it might not let me see all of that information right here from an internal login, but you would go through this process here and fill this form out. And there is also an option to use a bulk file. So if it's just one student, you can fill out the form, but otherwise you can add it to a CSV file and import it there.
So I see a destination district name. Is it auto-populated, Alex?
Yeah, so depending on the login you're using, that should come up with the district that you're in. And then you can go in and submit this here to submit that a student has moved out of your district to a new district.
Okay.
We have a question about the district and state, or a state district and school IDs having single digits 2 and 3 respectively. It says NWEA requires a 3-digit code for the district and school. Is it okay to add preceding zeros to make the code fit? And will
That'll work just fine. So this is my friend Michael, who I know works in Acton, which then gives him the distinction of being very early in the alphabet when they were giving out MEDMS codes. Fortunately, he knows how to format spreadsheets, because that would be challenging for me. Yeah, just do your preceding zeros, and then Varun and the data team on the back end will be able to pull that out, no problem.
Great.
And a clarifying question, do we need to have the state school IDs or just the district?
Sure, yeah. So we definitely want everyone to add the state student ID. As far as if you're talking about the school and district codes, let me show where that is. So back here under modify preferences and modified district is where you'll see, there we go, the schools that are here. So here is where you do want to put in your district name and code. So district code here, you'll want to put in that official district state code. And then for your schools, you can edit the name and state code here, and then this is where you would put the school state code in. So yeah, you do want to have both of those added in.
Are there any other questions or anything else we think may be beneficial?
I think while we've got a little time, Alex, could you show someone like how to, let's say we just wanted to spin up on the fly in the software a test session. Can you show people how that could be done?
Sure, yeah. So in this case, we already have students rostered. They're set up in the system. So you'd have to have the proctor role for this, but then you would be able to go to manage test sessions along the left. And I do want to point out too, we covered this in our professional learning webinar. So there's a video of me and a few other folks on our PL team walking through it in a bit more depth. So feel free to review that too. And also the help section. But yeah, so like Andy mentioned before, if you already are in the system with this class rostered to you, you can just click this test my class button. That's usually the easiest way. You can choose your class and then test now. And this will create the session for you right on the spot. It'll put in a session name and password. It'll just randomly create a session name for you. So all the students will log in using this on their devices. And then here you can go in and confirm students into the test and you can check their progress. But honestly, setting up a session, especially if you are a teacher with classes rostered, you just click that test my class, just double check everyone here is who you're planning to test. You can add students if there's anyone missing. And we also do recommend before anyone logs in that you assign the test ahead of time. So you can check off students' names and you can click assign test. And then in this sandbox, we have a few extra options, but you'll want to choose the correct test for that student. We recommend assigning it ahead of time because otherwise when the students log in, they'll be able to see which test to choose from. And as a proctor, you always have control on if they actually get in and are able to start taking that test. But this will just make sure they don't have any option to choose the wrong test, and that when you're confirming, you'll see that it's the correct test and they're logged into the right place.
Yeah. Hey, Matthew Brown, do you want to share some of that advice out loud? I think it's what I say, and I think it's good to hear from other people.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I try to get my teachers here at East End to check their rosters. We have a lot of movement here in Portland, with incoming and outgoing students, and it's pretty common. So I would just tend to, remind teachers to check their rosters, just so it creates a lot of anxiety for especially teachers, but our job is to try to make it as easy as possible on the teachers. So just go in, and you can easily go in and log in and just check your roster, and just to make sure you've got everybody there, kind of just being proactive instead of reactive.
Sound advice. And if 80% of your teachers do it, you are in a great spot.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great call out. And I think probably one of the easiest ways to do that is to kind of pretend you're about to create a test session. That way you can see all your students there. So just to demonstrate that real quick, you go to manage test sessions, and clicking that test my class, it's grayed out because I have a session going, would would jump you right into the session. So if you're just checking, you don't quite want to do that. You can do find students to test, and then you just narrow it down to your class. So you choose your school, you can choose a grade level, or you can leave that blank. Choose the teacher and the name of the class, and then search, and then you'll see all the students right there. So that's a pretty easy way to just filter down to your own class, see all the students here, and make sure everyone that you need is present.
Alex, we've had a request for the link to the webinar that you mentioned.
Yeah, that is available on the main DOE page. Let me pull that up really quick. Here we go. So yeah, so when you're on the main Department of Ed page, there's a section for map growth. And if you scroll down, we have training here, and here are all the recordings. So we've got the map growth basics. So this is mostly for teachers and proctors. So people who will actually be giving the assessment, we go through a demo showing how to do that. And then this one is mostly for leadership and how to plan, especially when testing in a remote environment, how to, prepare technology, prepare staff and parents and everyone so they understand what they might need to do. And then we have our onboarding webinar. So this is mainly for brand new districts who are just getting their site set up, adding schools, adding users. This will walk you through how to do that.
In general, so we're talking about adding, test sessions and things like that, uploading test sessions. I keep urging people, because you just saw how easy it was to hit that test my class approach, but there's going to be people, in the first year that are a little more nervous. Is it advisable, or is it hard for like a DAC to schedule all the sessions? What's your advice there?
Sure. Yeah, it's definitely possible. Depending on the workload, there may be a lot for them to do if they're scheduling for everyone. But honestly, the way I just walked through, a DAC could go in and do managed test sessions, find students, and they could filter to the class. So I'll just do that again real quick. We'll choose the teacher in the class, search. Okay, these are all the kids in that class. Add, that'll put them to this list at the bottom. Then they can assign the test. So let's say this is going to be a math session. We'll do math 6+, assuming that's the right grade for this group here. And then once that's done, they can save the session. So this way the session is saved and ready to be accessed later. Let's just say Alex Math 6. So you'll want to put a session name in. This is going to be what the students use to log in. So you don't want it to be too long or complicated, and you don't want to put in like punctuation or things that could be easy to typo. And this is also how the teachers and proctors are going to find their session. So it's usually good to put like the teacher's name or subject so they know this is like their math session, and then save and exit. So then when you come back to the screen, or when that proctor does after you've created the session for them as the DAC, then here they can see the session listed. And by default, when you're in this saved testing sessions, it's going to show the ones that you've created. In this case, I created it myself, so it's here, but you'll want to delete your name out and choose all proctors, and then you'll see sessions everyone has created. That way you can just find the one you need. And then if I didn't have one active right now, you'd be able to click on test now.
And so if you were for some reason out, Alex, I could pop in as a proctor in the school and also grab that test session, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So the sessions, they don't have direct proctors assigned. Anyone with that proctor role could go to that session and start it. So in the case where, there's a substitute or someone's out, somebody else can proctor the session.
Right. Like it, and we know these days, like, so we're all pitching in when people are out. Sometimes subs are hard to find in schools these days. So any proctor, which is different, by the way, from a lot of assessments, can pick up the standard and keep marching with the test. So Ginger had a question about how far in advance could you prepare test sessions?
Sure. Yeah. And you're right. We did cover that a little bit here. So it'll essentially let you do it by term. So you can go in and choose which term. So right now we're already in spring. You could set it up from now to any testing that would be done by June 15th.
And Ginger, I happen to know where you work, but if you were a district like our friend Matthew at a high mobility or my district, I tend to wait toward closer to the testing time because kids move around a little bit. But if you felt that you had a population that didn't have a lot of mobility, you could prep those sessions earlier. Just understand that you need to add kids to the test sessions as they come in, or remove them if you need to.
Great.
Alex, I have a question.
Sure.
So, I mean, this is a very common scenario which you see in Maine. Like sometimes the district might test a student at the wrong grade. So what is the procedure you follow if the student like attempted a session at the wrong grade? So, or if there is a mismatch of grade, how is that reconciled in the system? Like,
Sure. So I do want to point out for those who aren't aware is that our tests are kind of in groups of grades. So we've got a 2 through 5 test and also a 6+. And since it is adaptive, it would be applicable for any students within that grade range. So I think there could be 2 parts to this question. So if a student is rostered to the incorrect grade, as long as they're given a test that matches their grade level, so like they're not a 3rd grader taking the 6+, as long as it's still within their correct grade level, then that test, it'll still adapt and it'll still give them appropriate content, and it'll either go up or down as they're getting things right or wrong to find content that's challenging and appropriate for them. So there shouldn't be a need to retest in that situation if they took the correct test matching their grade, but they would still want to go in and either by importing a corrected roster or just going to manage students and manually correcting it, they can go in, put the correct grade in and save the profile. If it is a case where a student took completely the wrong test, like, you know, again, a 3rd grader taking the 6+, then in that case, it would probably be best to have them retake the assessment with the correct grade. And I know the department is working on some retesting guidelines. So I believe that that may be one that falls into that situation, but I would want to not speak for the department on that.
Yeah, and you know, this never happened in my district, but I've heard of this happening. You know, just I do think there's value to a DAC taking a quick look at the test that is assigned to kids in advance, because nobody wants people to take the wrong exam.
so my experience was always like the primary enrollment grade not matching the secondary enrollment grade. That is when I find these situations in my experience doing the change files. So just wanted to ask that.
Sure. So you're mostly talking about like on the student's profile, the wrong grade was chosen, not necessarily the wrong test was administered.
Yeah.
Is that right?
The wrong
Okay.
grade gets uploaded. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. So again, as long as they did assign the right test and assess that, they should be good. But yeah, what they can do is that students by district export or look up students by grade level to spot check or double check. And then they can always go in and manually edit under manage students.
Any other further questions or anything else, Andy or Alex, you think might be helpful?
Well, we do have another thing, a comment in the chat here. It says test grade level ranges are 2 to 5 and 6+. When we had teachers trying out NWEA before we purchased and taking the 6+ test, they were all very concerned that the tests were too difficult because they were being challenged until we reminded them that the test was balancing to their level. So it's just, you know, it's in support of what you've said already, Alex.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Joseph. That's a really good thing to point out for people who aren't aware or maybe aren't familiar is the thing that's different about map growth is it will continue to adapt. And honestly, an accurate map growth test has students getting around 50% right and 50% wrong. So it will keep getting more challenging to kind of push and see how much they know. And eventually students will get to a point where they're seeing content they haven't been exposed to yet, things that are above their grade level, and that's expected. So it's good for students to understand it will get challenging and there are going to be some you don't know, but that's okay because it's not a typical test where you're trying to get 100% correct and being scored. It's going to provide information back to the teachers on what they're ready to learn.
Diane had a question about adding the school number for the school setup. I think you do it under modify preferences, modified district. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. So districts, and timed me out, but districts who are already using the system and haven't added those in, you just go to modify preferences, modify district. For the district code, you click here, and then you'll want to enter the correct district code there. And then for schools, you just select whichever schools are missing the code and edit name and state code, and then add it in here. Keep in mind that this is the same field that's used on that roster. So that first column of school code, you'll wanna, you can use the roster to add that in, or you can do it here through the website. And I do see.
Yeah, Jacqueline, did that answer the question that you were referring to?
I think it's worth reminding people where they can find updated MEDMS numbers. Vince, the instructor rule does not allow them to proctor the exam. So you will then do an upload of staff data, as Alex showed earlier. So the staff, so it does give them a one-to-one correlation to the results of the data, and it does allow them to more quickly test their class. But there is use cases where the instructor wouldn't have rights to administer the test, and so you do need to make them proctors. And by making them proctors, you could simply export the list of your existing instructors, and then in the staff upload template, you could check the box for adding them as proctors. Thank you, Joseph. That's the MEDMS. Yes, that's great.
Oh, great. All right, well, I think we're getting close to time. Any final questions here?
Okay, I see no hands and I see no new chats.
Yep, I think we're all good. We will work to get this recorded and posted as soon as we can. And it'll be posted to our website, and we'll make sure we send a link out that will be accurate this time without a missing 9 at the end of it. We'll make sure we send the link out to the website so you have it, so you can access this recording to view at your leisure. And for those that are joining our call tomorrow, we have a call tomorrow in our regular 12 o'clock spot for office hours. And we're going to be talking about accommodations and going through the accommodations process during that session. You should all have the link. I will double check for accuracy to make sure that it is not missing any digits, and we should be good to go. So I will see you all tomorrow at noon. Thank you very much for your time.
See you all.